Well, Mount Kilimanjaro has always been called Kilimanjaro, and today, of course, is in Tanzania. And we can also notice that the border between Kenya and Tanzania is a straight border, but make sure that the Kilimanjaro is cut off nicely into Tanzania, and the line continues eastwards towards the Indian Ocean. Now, so there's a story behind this. And let us remember that when the Europeans came here, they started off as explorers, and we had European countries, mainly Britain, Germany, concentrating on East Africa, and to a little extent, France. But for our story today, it is Germany and Britain. When they realized, I'm talking about the European powers of the time, that there would be competition among themselves for the lands in Africa, the Berlin Conference was called to discuss the division of Africa, the one we call the Scramble for Africa, which was held in Berlin towards late 1884 to early 1885. So the decision was made at that Berlin conference that what we have as Kenya, which was called British East Africa, would border to the south with the German territory, they renamed German East Africa. At that time, the boundary between German East Africa and the British East Africa was not clearly defined, but it was understood at that time between the two powers that Mount Kilimanjaro would be in the British part of the territory. Now, the settlement started, and a lot of German settlers came and settled in the area around Moshi and Arusha and started large-scale farming, and others went towards the lakeside. And then there was a lot of activity also in Tanga. And at that time, the ruler of Britain was the Queen Victoria, and the German ruler was called the Kaiser. In their language, of course, it was a king. And the two royal families had a relationship in marriage to the extent that a child from the German royal family, from the Kaiser, was married to another child, offspring of the British royal family. In other words, Queen Victoria had nephews in the royal family in Germany. And when the delineation was finally agreed that we would have a proper boundary between the British East Africa and the German East Africa, the question of Kilimanjaro came, and there was a bit of not disagreement, but a contest, friendly, of where it should properly be. And it was decided by the officialdom of the two empires that it should be in Kenya. And it stayed in Kenya. But the Germans didn't feel that they were satisfied. So they were raising some appeals here and there to their king. And these appeals went up to their king, the Kaiser, and to Queen Victoria. And it was decided, or rather, Queen Victoria decided to award, to give this particular mountain as a gift, as a birthday gift to her nephew in the German royal family. And following that decision, the boundary was changed to what we know today. So we say, or history records, that Mount Kilimanjaro was a birthday gift to what is today Tanzania by a British ruler of the time, gift to the nephew. This happened just before the delineation, and there was agreement. Everybody was satisfied, or rather, they said they were satisfied, particularly the Germans, to get such a precious little gift on a birthday for their prince. Now, it so happened that after this matter was settled and the boundary was clearly delineated the way we know today, the German settlement continued. Then, of course, there was disagreement in Europe, and the two powers, the war occurred, the war broke out in 1914, and Britain and Germany were on opposite sides. So, in other words, the two powers were fighting against each other. And this also happened. The fight extended to here, and we had German troops in British East Africa and the British troops in British East Africa. And history records that there were battles. In fact, there were memorials recently of soldiers who fell during the First World War fighting for Germany because they entered British East Africa through Taveta, and the British repulsed them. So there was a lot of battle. There are battle sites and historical tourist centers which relate to the First World War for soldiers fighting between British and German troops. And there is what we call a military cemetery, which is existing today and maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation, and it is visited every year in commemoration of that event. And after that, Germany was defeated during the Second World War, and by the time it ended in 1918, what was then German East Africa was taken away from the control of Germany and handed over to the League of Nations, which is a precursor to the United Nations as we know it today. Now, that League of Nations didn't have any capacity to administer a colony. So they handed over the mandate to the British authorities who are already well established in British East Africa. So it went on, this mandate was taken up by the British colonial authorities in Kenya. They extended the operations, but they governed what was then became Tanganyika, not as a colony, but under a mandate granted by the League of Nations. And it went on. They didn't settle, or they didn't have these colonial laws like they have in Kenya until Tanganyika became independent in 1961. But the issue of Mount Kilimanjaro remains settled. Nobody has raised an issue to say we have a dispute here or we have a dispute there, because at the dawn of independence, one of the resolutions that the African countries made was that they would respect the colonial boundaries which they had inherited from their colonial powers. So the boundary between Kenya And Tanganyika that time remained, and there is no question, even today, which has been raised as to any dispute. So Mount Kilimanjaro is safely in Tanzania.